Hi. I'm recording this prior to recording the whole episode because I wanted to make sure I put this right here at the beginning. I forgot to mention it when I was doing the first record through. Um, so I'm going to be talking about Suikoden 1 and Suikoden 2 in this episode because I really want to continue with the Suikoden series that I've been doing. Um, and I need to talk about Suikoden 1 and 2 to get to that. But so here's the problem, right? When I last talked about this, we were not sure when we were getting the Suikoden 1 and 2 remaster that had been announced. We recently found out a couple months ago now, I think, that it is releasing in March of 2025, right around the corner. At the time I'm recording this, that's only 4 months away. So, part of me was like, maybe I should hold off until those come out, because let me tell you guys, I spoil both games tremendously in this, which I don't really think is a big deal for Suikoden 1 because it's not very good. We'll get into that. But Suikoden 2 is absolutely a game that like I'm gonna spoil here. And I couldn't do it. Like I didn't have it in me to talk about this game without talking about what about the story I liked, which involved a lot of spoilery stuff. So, what I'm trying to get at here is that I'm on my hands and knees begging you, if you have any interest whatsoever in playing Suikoden, especially Suikoden 2, please do not listen to this episode, or at least the Suikoden 2 section of this episode, without and until you have played the remaster that comes out in, let me remind you, at the time I'm recording this, 4 months. You have to wait 4 months for this game to come out. I'm begging you. The Suikoden 2 is my favorite game of all time. You're going to hear me say that a lot in this episode. You're going to get sick of me hearing it. But like, for this specific point I'm making, I really want to emphasize it. My favorite video game ever. If you have any trust in my tastes or my opinions, please, please, please pick up the remaster and play it. Or play, if you're okay with maybe some jankier quality of life, pirate a copy of the PS2 version, or buy a PlayStation 2 and buy the game off eBay. Wink. But it's please play this game, man. I'm begging you, especially with the remaster coming out. It's going to be so accessible. Please check it out. At least give it a try. If you don't like it, then you come back, listen to me to your heart's content. But yeah, that's all I have to say. Onward with the episode, I guess. Thanks for listening. Hello and welcome to this bonus episode of Melee's Turn Wheel, where today I'm going to be continuing a project that I started a while ago now, I guess, probably, I want to say like 3 or 4 months ago now, I guess. God damn, it's been a while. Where I'm going to be talking about the Suikoden series. Now, if you haven't listened to that first episode about Eiyuden Chronicles, which is technically not a Suikoden game, but might as well be, is very similar. It's a spiritual successor, etc., etc. I highly recommend you go check that out to get context on why I'm doing this. The short version is that I really like Suikoden. Suikoden 2 specifically is actually my favorite game of all time. And I just wanted an excuse to talk about it, I guess. Eiyuden Chronicles came out this year, and that was kind of the inspiration for starting all this. And today I'm going to be talking about not just Suikoden 1, but also Suikoden 2. I'm going to talk about them both in the same episode, because I was writing down my notes for them. I played both of them a while ago at this point, and I wrote my notes a while ago. But as I was looking back through my notes, it occurred to me that I don't think I have enough to say about either of them, maybe Suikoden 2, but definitely not Suikoden 1, to cover, an episode and have it not be like, I don't know, probably would have been like 20 or 30 minutes, which is fine. I can do shorter episodes sometimes, I guess. I probably will just be covering Suikodens 3, 4, and 5, as well as any other Suikoden stuff that I'm doing. I probably will just do like one episode per game for most of them. I guess we'll have to see. It'll depend. There is something that I'm going to be doing, like there's a Suikoden stuff that's like 2 games that I might talk about together in the next one of these that I do, but I guess we'll get to that later because I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. So yeah, today we're going to be talking about both Suikoden 1 and Suikoden 2. Suikoden 1, I mean, I guess we're going to just get right into it, right? Let me just pull up my notes. I should have had that ready to go, but I'm stupid. I'm very stupid. Okay. So Suikoden operates on the very simple concept of a JRPG where the whole sort of draw of the game is that you build these massive armies. Like, in Fire Emblem or whatever, you have like these armies of like 30-40 characters, sometimes upwards of like 70, depending on the game, although for the most part it tends to be about 40 to 50, I think, is like the average. I'd have to check that, actually. I do wonder what the average is for all the games in the series, but that's neither here nor there. The point is, Fire Emblem, as a Fire Emblem fan, and presumably if you listen to my podcast regularly, then you're a Fire Emblem fan. You're probably no stranger to RPGs with big casts of playable characters. But what makes Suikoden unique is that these casts of playable characters are like ginormous. 108 playable. 108 recruitable characters in every game. Not all of those characters are playable in combat. Some of them unlock utilities like shops for your base, or quality of life features. We'll get to that. We will get to that. Trust me. Some characters do unlock quality of life features, which is kind of frustrating. And the original Suikoden, which came out in, let me double check, I believe it was 1996 or 1997? 1995. Damn, this shit was old. It came out on the PS1. I know Suikoden 2 was 98 if I'm not mistaken. So I thought that this might be December 1998. So there's a pretty big gap here between Suikoden 1 and Suikoden 2. But the point I'm trying to make is that Suikoden 1 was an initiation of this concept that I think left a lot to be desired. And I mean, I won't beat around the bush. I'll just kind of come right out and say it here at the start. I don't think Suikoden 1 is actually that good. I had played a good amount of it. I wasn't sure exactly how much, but upon replaying and getting back to the point where I was at, and then finishing the game, I want to say I was probably about 2/3 of the way through. And I guess the entire time that I was doing that, in the back of my mind, I was like, well, eventually it's going to pick up. Eventually it's going to open up more. Thinking that I was still pretty early, because if my I haven't actually checked, but I believe if my instincts aren't failing me, Suikoden 1 is actually a fair bit shorter than Suikoden 2. So by the time that Suikoden 1 was like gearing up towards its climax, I'm just like, yeah, I mean, this is probably like, I'm getting close to the end of the first half, probably. I don't know if Suikoden 2 is actually twice as long. It's a little bit hard to say, even just based on my play times for this playthrough, or these playthroughs, because I have played Suikoden 2 so many times at this point that I kind of just like know what to do. So that wouldn't really be reflective of like the average person's playtime. But the point I'm trying to make is that I had sort of gaslit myself into thinking that, like, yeah, Suikoden 1 doesn't start out great. And like when I got to the point that I was at, it was like just starting to get a little bit better. And I was like, yeah, this is fine. It'll just like continue on this trajectory. But no, after the point I was at, the game is literally almost over. You're getting close to the end there. So. Overall, I was kind of disappointed. I mean, I guess I shouldn't have been that surprised, right? Like early, like that era of console, the PlayStation 1 and 64 or whatever. Those types of, that era of games, I guess, was still very janky. And for a lot of that, that comes from the transition to 3D. Suikoden is not a 3D series. The first two are. I think Suikoden 3 is the first transition into full 3D. But I mean, it's not like a platformer, right? It's a JRPG, so like it's menus, right? How hard could that be to fuck up, or how easy can that be to fuck up? But as a JRPG concept sort of just getting off the ground, you could tell that they were still finding their footing with a lot of things. This is like the level of lack of polish that I would expect from like an SNES game, like an experimental JRPG on the SNES, as opposed to the PlayStation 1, where they've had like more time to like figure their shit out, or like to draw inspiration from other JRPGs. It was developed by Konami. So Konami, I don't actually know off the top of my head what Konami did prior to 1995. Let me just Google Konami and see what their history was before. Now they make fucking pachinko machines or whatever. So, okay, so yeah, they started in the 70s. I don't know. I don't recognize most of these. I don't recognize any of these. Like, I recognize some of these games, but I don't recognize any like JRPGs that are on here, if there are any. So, I don't think that that's gonna be like I'm not gonna be able to draw any conclusions from their previous experience with JRPGs. Was Konami just the publisher of? I'm confused because I'm not seeing it in the list of JRPG, or in the list of games that Konami has done, like on Wikipedia or whatever. So I'm not actually 100% sure what the deal with that is. The point though is that obviously Konami had a long history of developing games at this point. But this was definitely like an experimental direction for them, I think. So I can understand why it didn't have a lot of polish. And they definitely cleaned up a lot. Like the jump between Suikoden 1 to Suikoden 2 is massive. I mean, I'm willing to recognize that Suikoden 2 still has its issues, and even though it's like it's my favorite game of all time, I understand that it definitely has its own areas where it lacks polish. But in Suikoden, like the gap is monumental. So I'm excited to see. Hopefully that trend continues into Suikodens 3, 4, and 5. And I'm hoping that doesn't like regress at all. But we shall see. Okay, so I guess I'll just go over all the basics. The story is pretty good, actually. I mean, there seems to be a trend, because it's true in both 1 and 2. I don't know if this continues, but the trend seems to be you are a character who starts in the what will eventually become the enemy nation, right? So like in Suikoden 1, you start out as the son of a great general in a place called the Scarlet Moon Empire. And that just the name sounds evil as hell, right? Your name is the canonical name. You can name your characters whatever you want in this. Unlike Eiyuden, actually, who had like their protagonist was like a real guy and had he had his own name. You couldn't change it. He had his own like personality and dialogue. The Suikoden protagonists for the first 2 games, at least, are silent protagonists who you can name, and you can influence some of their dialogue decisions, although most of the time decisions are going to be made for you a lot of the time. So that's a little bit unfortunate. So Tyr is the son of a general, like I mentioned. And he grows up, seeing that his dad kind of doing what he does for the Scarlet Moon Empire. And then as Tyr gets older and enlists in the Scarlet Moon Empire like army himself, he starts to see some of the horrible things that they do, and he ends up getting put in contact with a resistance group. It actually kind of ends up happening by happenstance, because he has a friend named Ted who the state wants to target. And because they like try to stand up for Ted, they get branded as traitors, and they end up going to the resistance group because they don't really have anywhere else to go. But like over the course of like helping out the resistance fighters, Tyr realizes like, hey, this is like an actually important cause that I want to be contributing to. So you decide to team up with them. You have your own retinue of loyal soldiers, I guess. Like your dad has like a few I don't know what the right word is, entourage, I guess. In fact, actually, the message that you get for recruiting a new character in this game is so and so has joined the entourage, I think is what they say. But yeah, like I guess there's Gremio, who's sort of like a house, like a servant. I guess they're servants, right? But they're like fighters. Like Gremio can fight, but he also does the cooking and cleaning. and then Pan and Cleo. I don't really know what Pan and Cleo do. They just kind of like are there. I guess you can assume that maybe they were like, they like taught Tyr, like they were like training instructors or whatever. But yeah, I don't really know what their role was, other than Gremio, who we explicitly see doing a lot of the cooking. Um, but they stay, when Tyr defects, they stay loyal to you. For the most part, there is a little bit of a hiccup there with one of them, but it doesn't really end up mattering. He comes over to your side anyway. And the game is really just about building up strength, building up your army, build an army, trust nobody, and fighting back against the Scarlet Moon Empire. Now, this game has in spades a problem that I mentioned with Eiyuden. And that is what I'm going to be referring to, because I'm realizing as I've talked about it in both Eiyuden and now in this game, I'm probably going to need a term to refer to it like succinctly. So I'm going to be calling it the flow of war. That's what I've elected to call it. And essentially what I mean by that is, if you listened to that Eiyuden episode, you would know that I complained about how it always felt kind of arbitrary, like what happened next in the story. There wasn't really like a good push and pull that you could like that felt intuitive, right? Like if you win a fight or lose a fight, it sometimes felt like completely arbitrary. The game didn't really like do a good job justifying like what decisions were made on either side that led to a victory or a defeat. And that was something that happened in Eiyuden. I think it was a little bit better in Eiyuden, but that was actually probably my single biggest problem with Eiyuden, is that it felt like sometimes the trajectory of the story was somewhat random. It never felt like, when I lost a fight, or even when I won a fight, that it was the result of like tactical proficiency on either side. And that ended up kind of feeling frustrating, because it never felt like, it kind of just felt like I was along for the ride. Suikoden 1 has that problem a lot, where it just feels like random shit is happening a lot, and then you do the final battle and you win. And like you can pinpoint like most, like in each arc makes sense in a vacuum. I just gotta look up a plot summary, because as I said, it's been a while. I remember most of the arcs, but I don't necessarily remember the order that they took place in. Okay, yeah. So I there's not really a good plot summary like on Wikipedia or whatever, but I refreshed my memory by watching a YouTube video by Zygor Gaming, I think is how you say that. So go check that video out if you want to see the full story for yourself. The majority of arcs in Suikoden 1 can be boiled down to either you're going to help out a group that you're hoping will join forces with you, or you're fighting a battle against Empire-controlled territory, which is basically exactly the breakdown of what happens in Suikoden 2 as well. And it's kind of hard for me to put into words. Maybe I'm alone on this. Maybe if you find like a diehard Suikoden 1 fan, they'll think I'm crazy. And I think it's just because I'm not articulating my perspective well. But it just felt like it felt so random. Like it didn't feel like there was much rhyme or reason in who we were fighting, why we were fighting, the order that we were fighting them in. And it felt a little all over the place. This game does introduce, and this is one of the reasons why I think talking about them together is really important. This game introduces a few connecting tissues that are going to continue through to the second game. Stuff like the True Runes, which the explanation, like the way the True Runes are handled in this game is not great in my opinion. I don't fully. I don't like the rune of what is it, the rune of life and death or something like that, because that's the other plot thread going throughout this game, is what's the deal with Ted. Your friend Ted at the beginning of the game had a special rune, which is like, magic powers, that he gave to you. Runes are like a thing in the universe that most people can utilize. They're like magic artifacts essentially that let you wield the power of like fire, water, air, earth, fucking magnets. How do they work? But there's also something called I believe 27 true runes. that are so powerful that people will like having one will like turn the tide of war in your favor. And they have different powers and stuff. We see a bunch of them in Suikoden 1 and 2. I don't remember all of them off the top of my head, and I don't want to look up a list because I'm worried about spoiling myself on later games. But I know that both the protagonist of Suikoden 1 and Suikoden 2 have a true rune. In Tyr's case, it is the or I guess technically the Suikoden 2 protagonist only has half of a true rune, but we'll get to that. It's called the rune of life and death, or the rune of something. I can't even fucking remember the name, man. And it's just so weird. Like, there's a part like halfway through the game where they do like a flashback where you get sent back in time, and you discover how Ted came to possess the true rune in the first place. And I just don't think that's very well handled. It kind of feels like an explanation for why Ted was friends with you at the start of the game, because he met you when you went back in time and now he knows who you are, which is cool. It's like a neat idea, but also it's like never fucking explained how any of that happens. There's a character named Leknot who is a very mysterious figure, has these really, really significant powers. The details about who they are, there's some given in Suikoden 1, but overall they're a pretty mysterious figure. They come from like an ancient clan of rune users, if I'm not mistaken. And there's like some magic fuckery going on that allowed it to be possible. I'm hoping that I learn more about Leknot's deal as the games go on. It's possible that I already know her whole deal, because I do remember they talk a fair bit about it in Suikoden 1, but it was really vague and like kind of generic. It didn't all register with me. So I'm hoping, because she shows up in Suikoden 2 as well, where in Suikoden 1 she's like kind of just like a normal but magical person, whereas in Suikoden 2 she just like randomly shows up in places. She's like a fucking like goddess. You know, she'll like teleport in and have like words of wisdom to impart with you, seemingly apropos of nothing. So I'm curious to see more about what her deal is. But then there's also a few sub stories, or I guess plot threads that continue on into Suikoden 2. The whole Scarlet Rune Empire is you can revisit this place in Suikoden 2. Not very much of it, but you can revisit like the capital city. And some characters pop up again. A lot of characters actually in Suikoden 1 are also in Suikoden 2. We'll talk about a few of them when we get to talking about the characters overall. One of the biggest ones, though, that I want to spend a little bit of extra time talking about, because it's going to come up again, it's like a very good chunk of Suikoden 2's story, is Necklord. So Necklord is a vampire, essentially. And he has sort of an ongoing story in the first two games with one of the most important characters in both games, whose name is Victor. And Victor has a history with Necklord because Necklord wiped out his entire village, essentially. So you have to accompany Victor as he goes to get a special sword, and then you fight Necklord and you seemingly kill him, although of course he ends up coming back in Suikoden 2. So that's a fun thread that I'll follow up on. I really like Victor. In fact, I guess this is as good an opportunity as any to segue into talking about the major characters from Suikoden 1. Because there's a lot of them, and a lot of them are really cool. Obviously, I've already mentioned Tyr McDole and his whole party, but I think probably more so than any of them, the two most important characters in this game are 100% Flick and Victor. These are two sort of like lieutenants in the rebel army. Neither of them are the leader. That is a character named Odessa, who I'll talk a little bit more about later. But both Flick and Victor are so cool. Each of them have like their own dedicated time dedicated to them in this game, to show off and to like be interesting characters. Victor in particular is really fun. I like Flick a lot in Suikoden 2. In Suikoden 1 though, I think Victor is like way better. But they're both awesome. Odessa is the leader of the rebel army when you first meet them. However, very early on in the game, your base at the time is attacked by the Empire, and she dies. And as a parting message, she asks you to carry on her torch. It's not really like she just met you. And unlike in Suikoden 2, where they have like a pretty justifiable reason why this kid should have control over a whole army, I feel like it's not as well justified in Suikoden 1. I mean, Tyr is the son of a great general, so like from that perspective, that kind of gets people on his side. He has the name to back up like his claim, but like he doesn't really do a lot to prove himself at the point that Odessa says like, hey, I think you should do this, which is something that they address really well in Suikoden 2, which I'm very happy about. One thing I wanna talk about, especially, I didn't really bring it up in Eiyuden at all, but one of the elements of the plot of all of these games, or at least all of the ones that I've played so far, is the tactician character. Every game has a tactician character that you usually have to go out of your way to recruit. There's usually a section of the story dedicated to it. In Eiyuden, it's a little bit more incidental. It's kind of looped in with another like arc that has more going on. But in Suikoden 1 and 2, you have entire arcs dedicated to recruiting your tactician. In Suikoden 1, that tactician is Mathayu Silverberg. And he's pretty cool. He has some cool plans. He has some cool ideas. I never felt like he was like that guy. You know what I mean? I never felt like he was him. In the same way that I think, especially Shu in Suikoden, I cannot wait to get to Shu in Suikoden 2. But especially him, but also Melridge from Eiyuden is also like pretty cool and has some cool moments. I never really felt that same way about Mathayu. So, but he is important for leading your army to victory and all that. So I do think he's a pretty cool character. I think one of the biggest things that hamstrings this game is that the villains aren't very good. I really like the villains in Suikoden 2. It's one of the reasons why I like the game so much as a whole. But the villains in Suikoden 1 are like, there's fucking like Teo McDole, who's like probably the best one. There's like Emperor Barbossa, I think is his name. There's Windy, who shows up a few times. She's pretty important. I think she ends up being... is that like basically no, Barbossa does something. Yeah, I don't know. I just never found any of them. I didn't find any of them that interesting. There are a few villains that are fun. Milik Oppenheimer is the name of one of them. But most of like the incidental villains you can actually like spare and recruit onto your side. Yeah, I mean, I guess really what it boils down to for me is I think one of the biggest reasons that Suikoden 1 fell flat, in my opinion, is that the characters just weren't interesting enough to compensate for the issues that I had with the story. In Eiyuden, I had a lot of issues with the story, but the characters were also good that it made up for it in spades. In this game, it like, other than Flick and Victor, I didn't really feel attached to any particular characters. This is especially relevant because the game does try... there is a running trend in all of these games. I guess you could say it's a tradition for this series, or at the very least, again, only having the experience of two Suikoden games and then Eiyuden, it might not happen in the other games, but it seems like it's going to continue. There is a character who, during the events of the main story, will die, and if you manage to get all 108 characters, all Stars of Destiny is what they're called in Suikoden at least, or then in Eiyuden I believe there's 120. If you manage to get all the characters, they will instead survive or come back to life in some capacity. In Suikoden 1, and I'm going to be spoiling all these games. I've already spoiled a fair bit, but like this is like, I'm going to be getting into actual spoilers, especially in Suikoden 2. In Suikoden 1, though, that character is Gremio. Gremio is sort of your right-hand man, and he like is definitely the most loyal to Tyr out of like anybody else in the whole army. And so he ends up sacrificing himself in order to help Tyr escape out of a situation. The death feels pretty anticlimactic to begin with, and I never really cared much for Gremio overall. He's alright. He's pretty cool. But he wasn't one of my favorite characters or whatever. So when he died, I wasn't super affected by it, and I didn't feel that joy as I did with in Suikoden 2, the character that comes back in Suikoden 2. I'm not gonna say who it is. I'm not gonna spoil Suikoden 2 until we get there, because in case you, for whatever reason, just want to listen to Suikoden 1 and then go play Suikoden 2 yourself or whatever. And then in Eiyuden, the character in question never actually dies. However, they are in a situation where they will die unless you have all characters. Essentially, it's kind of hard to explain, but like as soon as I saw that, because I got all the characters already, like I knew that was like something that I wanted to do, and then I saw this cutscene play out. I was like, oh yeah, she absolutely would have fucking died here if I didn't get all the characters. It's just, and she was like one of my favorite characters in the whole game. So again, I'm not going to spoil who it is. Go, like play Eiyuden. This is what I actually want to say. But yeah, so overall, not very impressed with the game, with the story and writing side of things, and the gameplay doesn't fare much better, unfortunately. I have a lot of negative things to say about the gameplay as well. My fears might have been unfounded though, because I'm already at half an hour and I'm still just now moving on to the gameplay. But we'll see. This might just end up being really long. Maybe I could have done them both separately. Well, whatever. So the gameplay of Suikoden is very simple. You have a party member, you have a party of 6 members, and there's like various mechanics that make the gameplay more interesting. There's rows. You can change what row you fight on. Each character has different ranges for their attacks. So like some characters need to be on the front row in order to attack. Some characters can attack from the back row. Some characters like can only attack physically from the front row, but they're more like glass cannons who use magic, so you might want to put them in the back row and just have them use magic, which has its own like pros and cons. I ended up using a team of, I don't remember, I wanted to keep track of my teams for all these games, which I did in Suikoden, or sorry, in Eiyuden. In Suikoden 1, the problem was that like I never really felt like I had much flexibility to use who I wanted to use, which is definitely my biggest issue with the gameplay of this game, is that in almost every story sequence, most of your team is predetermined and cannot be switched out. So you always have to use Tyr. In most circumstances, you're going to have to use Gremio until he dies, but even after that, there are characters that come in to replace him. Flick or Victor is usually, at least one of them is forced in most arcs, sometimes both. In the final arc, I think they're both forced. Sometimes you'll have to use like fucking, like plot relevant characters. There's an elf. There's like an arc where you had to interact with elves at some point. One of those characters is forced on you the whole time. I don't think you at any point for more than like a brief couple of plot points have the ability to choose more than half of your party. The vast majority of the time I was playing with two or three party slots that I could actually influence. So it didn't really feel meaningful for me to like actually keep track of who I was using. I believe the ones that I ended up settling on were Mina, who's like a blonde girl. Let me look up list of Suikoden characters. Okay, it was driving me crazy, so I went and checked. In addition to Mina, the other 2 characters that I used were a character named Camille, who honestly I just kind of thought was hot, so I wanted to use her. You also get her pretty early, so it felt like like she was one of the first characters I got. And she's around for like some of the early boss fights, and I enjoyed using her, so I just decided to stick with her. And the other character I used was Kai. Kai is like an older dude, and he's supposedly the teacher of Tyr. So that kind of throws out my earlier hypothesis that maybe Pan or Chloe were his like training instructors, because apparently that was Kai. Now the reason I used Kai, and he wasn't like super interesting as a character, but this actually segues really nicely into one of the series' unique mechanics, which are called unite attacks or team attacks. It's I think it depends on the game. Eiyuden calls them something different, I think. And essentially what that is that if you have certain characters in your party, they have to be specific characters that usually have some sort of connection, although sometimes the connections can just be like they have similar vibes, or like it can just be kind of arbitrary. You might have to look up a list to figure out who some of these guys are. But Kai and Tyr have heavy unite attack, which I believe attacks everybody on the field at once and does like a good amount of damage. So that was like really helpful over the course of the game, especially considering that Tyr is obviously forced in every arc. He's the main character. You have to use him. I wanted to emphasize this in the Eiyuden episode, but I don't think I ended up getting around to it too definitively. You do not have to use the main character at all in Eiyuden. You can put them in your like auxiliary group, and use like 6 completely unrelated party members. In fact, I don't think you ever... There might be like a couple arcs where you have 4 forced party members, but you have 3 slots that you can put like characters in that are forced to travel with you, but like not actually using combat. So there might be a couple of times where you have to use like one specific character. But even then, you can usually pick from a group of 4, and then most of the rest of the time, you can just use literally whoever you want. So that was awesome. I really liked that Eiyuden did that. And unfortunately, Suikoden 1 and 2 do not take a leaf out of that book, and force you to use their respective protagonists in every story arc, essentially. Whenever like they're just always in the party. Which is not like that's the rule, for most RPGs rather than the exception, right? You're not usually able, like you can't take Chrono out of your party in Chrono Trigger. That's something that always frustrated me a lot. Well, at least not for the beginning of the game, into later stuff, but whatever. You're always usually forced to use, I think you're forced to use the Persona protagonist in your party in all the Persona games. I mean, it'd be really weird if you weren't actually, because they have that whole unique thing with being able to switch personas. So, yeah, so that's like it's not like a serious complaint, I guess. It is in Suikoden 1 because it's usually not just Tyr. It's usually like 3 or 4 people at once are being forced on you, and you can't do anything about that, which is the annoying part. Now, I really like the unite attack feature. I think it's really cool. I think it adds a lot of replay value as you like put different people in your party and experiment. That works especially in Eiyuden and to a decent extent in Suikoden 1. However, in Suikoden 2, in Suikoden 1, you can't really experiment too much because you have so many people forced on you. It really all comes back to that one problem ends up causing a lot of like ripple effect issues, right? Where you can't experiment with unite attacks. You can't you don't really get a chance to grow attached to other party members that you might want to use because you're forced to stick with like 3 or 4 guys that are forced on your team. The people that are forced on your team usually rotate out, admittedly. But it's you don't ever really have that freedom of choice to pick more than a few characters yourself. Just a few miscellaneous thoughts, I guess, before I kind of move on to my final thoughts about this game. I don't really like the dungeons. I felt like the dungeons were super frustrating in this game. Suikoden 2 doesn't have great dungeons either. In fact, neither really does Eiyuden. I don't think the dungeons in the series are that good. At least they weren't that good for me. They always feel a little bit frustrating. They always feel like the encounter rates are a little bit too high, and the battles can drag out for a little bit long. So I never felt like I never really felt like I was having a good time in a dungeon. Some of the boss fights can be really frustrating, and I don't think any of them are like super cool for the most part either. Suikoden 2 has some cool boss fights though, so I am excited to talk about some of those, although I don't think I'm going to get into any of them into too much detail. And then one thing I completely forgot about is, this game obviously starts the tradition, as we see in I assume every Suikoden game, and then also Eiyuden, of you find a castle somewhere that you repurpose to be your home base, essentially, and you can expand. In Eiyuden, they have a whole system for expanding your base, whereas in Suikoden 2 and 1, it usually depends either on plot progression or on like which characters you've recruited, or both in some cases. One of the weirdest things about this game is that it fumbles the execution of the castle in like really weird ways, where it's like fine. But it's such a pain to navigate. Like traversing floors is so annoying. And as the castle gets bigger, they don't just like expand outwards. Stuff will like rearrange depending on the stage that your castle is in. So like the item shop is not always in the same place. I don't know if the item shop might always be in the same place, but that's just an example. Like there are shops and utilities in the base that that will change position as your castle grows, which makes it really confusing to navigate. And it never felt like Suikoden or Suikoden 2 or Eiyuden, where like it was cool to like go around, explore your base and like see what the different characters were doing. It just kind of felt like a pain. Um, and I never ended up really learning the layout as well as I did in Suikoden 2. Although again, that might be a little bit unfair of a comparison just because I've played Suikoden 2 multiple times. I don't really remember if I had that layout memorized in the first time I played the game. I genuinely don't remember, but overall, I think that this game. I mean, like, what do you want me to say, right? Like, I could give you the most basic analysis, which is that it is a game that started a trend of really cool ideas. It kicked off the concept to a whole series with so many neat elements that were just not executed on very well at all. The story wasn't great, the characters weren't great, the gameplay wasn't great. I didn't like this game very much. It is a shame to see because of how much I liked the other two. One of which I've already talked about. One of them I'm about to talk about. I'm just looking through my notes to see if there's anything I missed. I have a note here about the EXP system, which I don't know why I made that note. Oh, actually, okay, so I still don't know why I made a note about the EXP system. I think how did the EXP system work? Man, I kind of forgot a lot about this game already. I think there was some weird shit about the EXP system where there was a like the level curve just felt weird if I'm remembering that right. Oh, maybe it wasn't specific to Suikoden 1. Maybe it was. Yes, I think it was the EXP system for the series as a whole is what I wanted to talk about because it's kind of interesting. Essentially, the way it works is that you have it's like Pokemon basically. You have a certain amount of experience that you get when you beat an enemy or a group of enemies, and that experience is distributed through whatever characters are left at the end of the fight. So if you only have one character left, they get all of that experience, which can be cool. It can be it can be frustrating sometimes too, though, where you're not, some of your guys are falling behind if they get knocked out too frequently. But it can also be a good way to to grind up characters. It's a unique system that I overall like. But like I said, it is very similar to Pokemon, so I don't know how unique it is, but it's cool. I think that's all I wanted to say about it. If I remember what I had planned to say, like if there's something specific about how it worked in Suikoden 1 that I was going to talk about, I will put that in post, I guess. But I don't think I don't think there was anything in particular. I think I just kind of wanted to talk about it as a whole. And then I have a note here about Necklord's Castle. Necklord's Castle is the one dungeon in the game that I think is actually really cool. And that's true in 2 as well. I think Necklord's Castle is probably my favorite in that game as well. But in 2, not only is it in 1, not only is the atmosphere really cool, like you're traversing this castle, and as you're given a time limit to get to the top of the castle by sunset in universe. There's no actual like in-game time limit, but as you progress through the dungeon, you go outside multiple times, and each time the sun is a little bit lower, which is so cool. The music's great. There's various puzzles to solve. I really liked Necklord's Castle in this game. It's probably my favorite dungeon between both games, which is cool. Overall, I feel like Suikoden 1 took a lot more risks and did a lot more creative things with the dungeons. It's just that most of the time it didn't pay off. I think the dungeons in 1 are like not only more like mechanically interesting for the most part, but they're also like a lot more visually interesting. It feels like there's a lot more cool places that you can explore in this game, just like aesthetically, but it's not like the gameplay really just boiled down to like walking around hallways where the encounter rates were too high, and it did get a little bit frustrating by the end. So, but yeah, overall, I'm not a big fan of this game, but I do appreciate what it accomplished, and how it moved the series forward, how it kicked off the series, and how those ideas were expanded on in Suikoden 2, which is what I'm going to talk about next. I did just make a note here because I believe my plan is to talk about who my favorite character was in each game as I go on. I'm pretty sure that's why I wrote with nothing else, with no surrounding context. I just wrote the word Victor down at the bottom of my notes. I'm pretty sure that's why I did that. So yes, Victor was my favorite character in this game. And I don't think it was particularly close. I don't remember anybody else like having that same level of enjoyment that I got out of Victor. And Victor's great in Suikoden 2 as well. Spoilers. We're gonna see them again. And Flick is back too. Flick had I didn't really talk about Flick as much as I probably should have, but Flick had a whole thing where he was like in love with Odessa, who was the leader of the army who died. And there's like a subplot with him being frustrated that like he doesn't think that you're up to the task of like following in her footsteps, which is I think fair. But you know I think a lot of people might get frustrated at Flick there, but he's a lot cooler in Suikoden 2, so I'm excited to talk about him there. But yeah, so in case you know, I'm kind of keeping mental track here. Periel was my favorite character in Eiyuden, and now Victor is my favorite character in Suikoden 1. Did I rate my favorite character in Suikoden 2 in my notes for Suikoden 2? I didn't. Who is my favorite character in Suikoden 2? I'm gonna have to decide that right now, I guess. Oh wait, hold on. I think I made a tier list. Can I just look at my tier list? Because I think I know who it is, but I want to double check. Yes, okay. I did make this is not what I remembered my tier list looking like, but it's pretty good. I stand by most of this. Okay. Anyway, Suikoden 2 is my favorite game of all time, which is just a funny juxtaposition to jump from a game that I didn't actually care all that much. I do actually keep track of the games that I've played over the course of the year, and I put them in a list on Backlogged, which you can check out, backlogged.com/I made Melee Kirby, or whatever the user thing is. You can check out my list, and you can see every game I played in 2024, and you can see my rankings of them. And Suikoden 1's actually at the bottom right now, below Xenoblade 3, which is a game that I've talked about not liking very much. So, you know, Suikoden 1's just kind of like not very good, outside of the association that I have with it with better games. But yeah, so jumping from that to my favorite game of all time, Suikoden 2, is quite the jump. And I think one thing I wanted to make clear, I guess it's not super relevant anymore because it's applied to Suikoden 1 as well because of how long it took for me to actually sit down and record this. But when I remember I made a note here, as I was playing, because it occurred to me as I was playing the game, like, I'm just having so much fun. I am enjoying this so much that I'm not taking notes, which is not something that I've had to worry about for like in Fire Emblem at all. That's for sure. You know, obviously I love Fire Emblem, but I haven't, you know, I've never been in such a position where I've been like, man, I'm so locked in. I'm having such a good time right now that I'm not even bothering to take notes. And I realized that as I was like getting a little bit into the game, I was like, I should probably make sure to like be more on top of this, but just like, you know, as a disclaimer, if there's anything that I don't go over, you know, if you're familiar with the game that you think would have been, helpful or you know, important for me to go over, that's probably why. I probably just literally forgot to write it down because I was so locked in. But what really amazed me about going through this game for like, I think this is probably like my 4th or 5th full playthrough of the game, is that every time I play through the game, I always find out new stuff, or I always notice new things. As I was playing through this game, it would occur to me, I was like, I don't know what half of these fucking status conditions do. I had to look up a few of them, and like documentation on them is like not always good. In fact, it's kind of terrible documentation for the most part on like how these fucking on how these status conditions work. So there were some where like I was literally like reading like threads on a forum, and someone was like, yeah, like this status does like, you know, weakens attacks ? Like they didn't even fucking know. Like they don't know what these statuses do because the game is like not very tutorialized. It's not at all, which is a flaw. You know, if you are going through a game and you don't understand how some of the mechanics work, that's not a good thing by any means. But all I'm gonna say is that I've played through this game multiple times and I've been just fine. Haven't had any major concerns. I haven't ever been like, man, I wish I knew what this did, because chances are, if I don't know what it does at this point, it probably doesn't fucking matter. So that's my stance on that. Now, as much as I love this game, I do have to acknowledge that it's full of bullshit sometimes. And this is actually something that I mentioned earlier. I didn't really talk about it much in Suikoden 1. It's definitely worse in Suikoden 1 than it is in 2, although it exists in 2 as well. Just as an example of the bullshit, right? There are a lot of times where quality of life features, like the ability to move, like the ability to sprint, essentially. In Suikoden 1, you have to have a rune that allows you to sprint. And Suikoden 2, in order to move your max movement speed, you have to have a specific character in your party. And it's like, it's just not, it's like, why? You know, like, that's dumb. There's various other things, right? Like, there's some parts of the game that I find frustrating. There's some elements of the story that don't make a whole lot of sense, or that I'm kind of just like, yeah, whatever. Like, I either don't think about it anymore because I played it so many times, or it just never really occurred to me in the first place. I had a friend watching me play through most of Suikoden 1 and then all of Suikoden 2, and you know, making my pointing out things that I've never really thought of, like, why does this work this way? How did this happen? I was like, I don't know. So I'm going to spend a lot of time gushing about this game. I'm going to be talking about it in mostly positive terms, and I'm going to gloss over a lot of its problems, but I wanted to make that clear right at the beginning that it does absolutely have its problems. I think probably one of the biggest problems, and I guess I'll just address this right now because I should have brought it up in Suikoden 1. Again, this is another one of those things that I forgot to mention in Suikoden 1 that I should have. And this is actually a problem with all three games. I don't think I even mentioned this in the Eiyuden episode, actually, because they're so, like, unimpactful there. The Suikoden series and Eiyuden has a type of conflict that are called war battles, and they work a little bit differently than they do in they work slightly differently, I think, in every game. In Suikoden 1, they're like text-based challenges where you have to basically play rock, paper, scissors with the decisions that your opponents are going to make, and some allies you can use special abilities that, like, make it easier to predict what the enemy's going to do. It felt like a crapshoot, honestly, a lot of the time on whether I was successful in those battles, and I ended up just having to, like, I think I save stated a couple times to get through some of these war battles, because if you lose a war battle, you game over, and there's, like, sometimes a lot of cutscene in between doing, like, where your last save point was and then actually doing the war battle. Suikoden 2 war battles are, like, just bad Fire Emblem, basically, where there's, like, not a whole lot of rhyme or reason about, like, how your characters stack up to each other. I mean, they have stats, right? They have attack and defense, but, like, there's very poor feedback on, like, how skills work, how much damage you're doing, which part of it feels intentional, part of it feels like it's intentionally obfuscated from you, but it definitely doesn't make it feel very good. And then in Eiyuden, they're basically glorified cutscenes. So all three of those are not very good. I think Suikoden 2 probably has my favorite of the three, but that's not really saying much. It's still really obnoxious. Like, they're still like, I love them narratively and I like them atmospherically. They lead to some really good set pieces for the story. But in terms of gameplay, they're usually, like, really lame and not very fun. So I'm hoping that they get better, or, you know, I hate to say it, I'm kind of hoping that they just, like, go away eventually, but you know, who can say. But yeah, so that's my spiel on the war battles. That overdue that I brought that up. I should have mentioned it probably as far back as the Eiyuden episode, but I definitely should have mentioned it in Suikoden 1, so I'm glad I remembered to mention it here. But yeah, as I said, I think that's everything negative that I have to say about the game. So I'm just going to go full gush mode. I'm going to go full gush mode. So, you know, strap in. We're going into it. The beginning of this game is fucking incredible. Like, the opening, like, 20 minutes of this game is so fucking good, guys. Like, you start off as Rio. I think it's Rio is the name of the main character in this game. And unlike in the last game where it feels like you're not really like, I don't know, like you have your friends, right? You have Pon and Cleo and Gremio, but and Ted obviously. But in this game, you're accompanied by like one guy for like this opening segment at least. His name is Jowie, and he's your best friend. You know, you've been best friends since you were kids. And the game does such a good job establishing the relationship between you two. You know that you bicker a little bit. You know you have some. I guess here you don't really bicker as much, but you have some good interactions. And the game exposits at you in a little bit of a ham-fisted way, but you know the relationship between them feels really genuine. And you are a soldier in the army of Highland. And you have just been told that the war that has been going on between Highland and a place called the city-state of Joustin is ending. They're signing a peace treaty. There's no more war. Great, awesome. Everybody hates war. So you're basically just like going to bed, and the next day you're gonna wake up and go home. But the problem is that someone has decided to violate the peace treaty. And at first it's like, oh, is this an attack from the city state? You know, they launched a surprise attack on us. But no, it turns out that the prince of all Highland, whose name is Luca Blight, and trust me, we will talk about Luca Blight. He has staged basically a betrayal, and used your division, which by the way is specifically stated on a couple of occasions to be like youth soldiers. They are like teenagers essentially. He has decided to kill everybody and blame it on the city state. In order to get the war started again. He wants the war to continue because he wants the pretense to take over Highland, or sorry, not take over Highland, take over the city-state, and honestly, probably just like destroy the city-state as the game goes on. It becomes increasingly clear that he doesn't just want to take over Joustin. He kind of low-key seems to want to destroy the whole fucking world. So Luca Blight is great. I love him so much because he is such a bastard, and he's so menacing. Over the course of I'll skip ahead a little bit here. Over the course of the game, you see him like burn villages to the ground. There's one specific cutscene in particular where you actually see you're in the middle of like he's in the middle of raising a village, and you're kind of just have to sit on the sidelines because you're alone. You can't do anything to help anybody. And you watch as he like openly torments people, like makes them like beg for their lives before he kills them. Like he is psycho. He is so fucking crazy. And he's like I saw those cutscenes for the first time, and I, maybe more so than any villain in any game I've ever played, I was like, I have got to fucking take this guy down. It's such a good setup for making a villain that you're so genuinely invested in taking down. And Luca Blight is a powerful presence throughout the whole game, both like politically because he's like the leader of the army, obviously, but also he is physically powerful. Anytime he shows up anywhere, you lose essentially, right? Like either he like turns the tide of victory in his favor, and I'm gonna talk a little bit about how they resolve that because that's like my favorite boss fight in any game. But we'll cover that later. I want to continue with the sort of the plot synopsis. You see, I could go through the plot synopsis. Like I know the entire plot like the back of my hand at this point because I played this game a lot. So you and Jowie figure out that he's doing this, and you manage to escape. You jump off of a cliff, and get washed away in a river. At this point, a cutscene plays, which you should go look up. It's like within the first 15 minutes of the game. It's extremely potent. It's extremely poignant. I've heard it compared to Up, the beginning of Up, which is notorious for being like this amazing piece of like amazing. Basically, they put an amazing short film at the beginning of Up. If you've seen Up, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And it kind of presents in the same way where it's a silent film that communicates everything you need to know about these characters and the relationships between them, with this most amazing, beautiful song in the background called Reminiscence, one of my all-time favorite video game songs. And and that's like it's like such a good cutscene. And after it's over, you have been separated from Jowie, and the essentially the beginning of the game is reuniting with Jowie, and trying to basically to make it back home to Highland, because at this point it takes a lot longer for Rio to get on board with joining the other side than it did for Tyr in Suikoden 1. You meet Victor and Flickerback. They are mercenaries in this game, fighting with Joustin. They sort of take you in, while Jowie is kind of nowhere to be found. Eventually, you reunite with Jowie, and the first section of the game is spent trying to get away from the mercenaries. They're like basically have you prisoner. They're being really chill about it. You know, they're cool guys. They don't want to hurt you or anything. But because you're like enemy combatants, you know, they want to keep an eye on you. So they're gonna like lock you up in a cell or whatever until you can until you know, they figure out what to do with you essentially. But you manage to escape and go back to Highland, where you are immediately scapegoated into being the traitors that led to the state attacking your youth brigade. And there's this whole amazing sequence where you're about to be executed, and then Flick and Victor come to the rescue, and you know, and you end up going back and joining them permanently this time. It's so fucking good, and that's basically the first leg of the game, and it only gets better from there. I do feel like the opening drags a little bit. I love the very beginning with all the Luca Blight stuff. But basically everything from getting found by the mercenaries to returning back with the mercenaries, after escaping your hometown, that drags a little bit. I like what actually happens in your hometown in Highland, because I think it's very emotionally resonant. But it's not. It's a little dull. I mean, I guess I'll say it. But that is where sort of my problems with the story mostly end. I'm not going to go into every little arc. I'm going to talk about like the key moments that I really love. Because over the course of the next few arcs, you are essentially pushed further and further back as Highland is gaining more and more ground. You try to stand your ground in Muse, and that doesn't work. Or sorry, you try to stand your ground in the Highland. I can't speak. I'm gushing so much I can't even speak. You try to stand your ground in the mercenary fortress. That doesn't work. So you have to fall back to Muse, which is the capital of the city-state. That doesn't work. So you have to fall back to a place called South Window. And that doesn't work. You end up like there's a Necklord subplot that takes place while you guys are kind of recuperating in South Window. When you finish that Necklord subplot, yeah, they're like, sorry guys, we lost the city already. Like we've been gone for like a day and we've already lost the entire fucking city. From there though, and it's this long, like multiple arc section of losing ground, finding your footing for a minute, preparing for a fight, and then something goes wrong. Either the enemy just had a better strategy than you, or I guess I should talk about the elephant in the room. In the case of Muse, you were actually betrayed by somebody. You were betrayed by Jowie, your best friend, who, you know, escaped Luca Blight with you at the beginning of the game, has been fighting alongside you for all this time. About a quarter of the way through the game, he decides to defect to Highland, for his own reasons. You know, I don't want to get too much into it. You know, the gist is that he thinks that, like he really cares about Highland, and he thinks that he can make the world a better place by doing what Luca Blight is doing, but just being nicer essentially. I'm kind of boiling it down. I do think his reasonings are a little bit like shaky at times. So that's not, you know, that's as much as I love this game's story, I'll be the first to admit that Jowie's motivations feel a little bit off sometimes. That's for sure. But overall, I do really like the arc that they take his character on. And I mean, I'm not going to spoil how that resolves, but he is like for most of the game, he is a central antagonist. And then when Luca Blight eventually is dealt with, Luca Blight is not the final boss. Actually, neither is Jowie, really, depending on the ending you get. But you know, but he takes center stage after Luca Blight is gone. and you have to end up resolving that conflict with him, and it's really cool. I haven't even mentioned Nanami. I love Nanami. Nanami is Ryu's sister, who you meet when you go back to Highland at the beginning of the game after escaping the mercenaries. You meet up with Nanami, and Nanami like actually escapes Highland with you and accompanies you back to the mercenary fort. She's great. She's such a force of personality. I love her. And I guess I'll say it here. And again, reminder, big spoilers. Nanami is actually the character that if you don't get all 108 characters in your group, she dies. She ends up sacrificing herself to help save you at the end of the game. And the way that they bring her back into the fold, if you do get 108 characters, is a little bit wonky. It doesn't. It feels like it feels like it should not depend on the connection of getting all 108 characters is not clear. I guess so. Probably even less so than Suikoden 1. But I love Nanami. She's so cool. She's like one of my favorite characters in the game. It's just like banger set piece after banger set piece after banger set piece. I mentioned war feel earlier, the term that I was using to explain sort of like how the narrative progression feels. Like, does it feel justified that you were winning or losing? Do battles feel like genuine victories that you worked for, and do losses feel like they were earned rather than just kind of like arbitrarily decided? And the answer in Suikoden 2 is absolutely the fuck yes. I want to really highlight my favorite part of the whole story. Actually, there's another part that I want to highlight later, but I'll highlight this one for now. I mentioned earlier about the tactician, right? In each game up to this point, you have an arc where you meet a tactician. The arc for Suikoden 2's tactician is not only the best arc in Suikoden 2, in my opinion, and the best tactician arc between all three games. I think it might actually be my favorite arc between all three games so far. So you have a tactician already. Her name is Apple. I don't like the way the game treats Apple, unfortunately. It does feel like she gets like super hard sidelined and treated like dog shit a lot of the time in favor of the better tactician. But the better tactician is really cool, so I don't mind. So at one point she says, "I'm not doing a good job advising you guys. I'm not fit to be a tactician for this army, but I know somebody who is. We need to go find a guy named Shu." And Shu lives at a certain place nearby. You go to meet him, and he's an asshole. He's using his genius to play the stock market and is not taking an interest in the war because, as far as he cares, like he's staying out of it. Like Highland won't change anything really. Like, he has money. At the end of the day, he's staying out of it. He has no interest in it. He just wants to be rich and live on his own and be a recluse or whatever. And you spend this whole arc like trying to convince Shu to get on your side, and it like just becomes increasingly more desperate. He makes Apple like get down on his knees and beg. He puts you on an impossible mission to like get a coin out of a river, which is already arbitrary and like kind of dangerous because like it's like you have to stand around in freezing like super cold water for several hours. But not only that, he didn't actually even throw the coin into the water. He just wanted to get you to fuck off, so he gave you this task. And there's this amazing scene where they're all just like looking through the river, and Nanami's like, "Apple, he didn't throw the coin. Like, we gotta stop pretending that this is gonna work." And Apple's just like not like, she's just not hearing it. She's like, "No, he wouldn't do that. He wouldn't." But it's hard to like get into like all. It's hard to get into why I like it so much without talking about like every single little minute detail, which is kind of what I'm doing. But I want to try to move away from that. But I think my favorite part of this whole sequence is that when you do get Shu to join you, it feels like the entire tide of the war changes. Because now, instead of losing ground constantly, he shows up, he makes a plan in like 2 seconds, and immediately you win. And it's like, oh shit, okay, alright, this guy knows what he's doing. And from there, like, there's still some ebb and flow, right? You don't win every fight. There's still like infighting between the groups that you're trying to unite, which is a plot detail at several points. But overall, the tide of war changes, and it feels extremely justified because you have somebody here who knows what they're doing and who's like willing to take risks, and it's just so cool. I fucking love Shu. I guess I'll just say it now. Shu is probably my favorite character in the game, although I also really like a guy named Richmond who is also involved in the Shu arc, but I'm not gonna get into him because we'd be here all day. I really like Shu and I really like Richmond. It's hard for me to decide which one I like more, but they're both great. Um, as I mentioned, I talked a little bit about the dungeons already. I'm just going through my notes here. Um, I didn't like the dungeons very much. But where this game makes a huge element of this game that it makes up from Suikoden 1 is that you actually get to choose most of your team in this one most of the time. There are segments where a good chunk of your team is forced. The entire Necklord segment that I mentioned earlier, at least the first one, there's a couple Necklord segments in this game. The entire first Necklord segment is completely your party is completely predetermined. You only have 5 party members. You don't get to choose who they are. So that's a little bit annoying. But for the most part, you're given a lot more freedom, especially after Nanami dies, sadly, because she was forced in most arcs. So now at the end of the game, when she's gone, and you have like the final couple of plot points left, you can basically choose your whole team. I ended up going with Anita, Sheena, Gengen, Ryu was obviously always forced. Futch, who's a character in Suikoden 1, and Sierra, who is like a vampire lady. She's also a vampire like Necklord, except I think she's a lot older, and more powerful, or at least like ostensibly more powerful. And I actually have a lot to say about Sierra because she's going to be relevant here for us just a little bit. And there's so many great characters to choose from. It's not just a small handful that actually feel fleshed out in this one. I mean, I'm looking at my tier list right now, and there's like so many cool, like so many fun characters that just like either they're incidental, characters like Millie, or Rikamaru, or Vicky, who are just like fun, and I enjoy using them, and I think that they're like in gameplay and in their the little bit they get the time to shine as characters, they're just really fun. But then you also have characters that are important to the story, like more characters that are important to the story in ways that make them stand out. Like characters like Nina, who's really important in one of the other best arcs in the game, which is the Green Hill arc. I love the Green Hill arc, but I'm not going to break that down bit by bit because we'd be here all day. I really like Apple. I really like Makalov and no, not Makalov. That's the Fire Emblem character. Miklatov, I think, is his name, and Camus, who is a Fire Emblem character. But that's his name. They're like leaders of knights and Matilda. I really like Hicks and Tengar are really fun characters. They're important in this game again. Sierra is great. Like all these characters that actually feel like not only do I want to use them, but the game gives me the opportunity to use them. So it is so much better than Suikoden 1 in that regard. I want to talk about a couple things. I want to talk about the final confrontation with Luca Blight because it is my favorite boss fight in a video game. And I also want to talk about the various endings that this game has because unlike in Suikoden 1, which really only had one ending, I guess if you want to count the like Gremio Survives ending as separate, you could, but it doesn't actually affect like the story of the game in the same way that the different endings of this game do. So I'm gonna get to that, but first I want to talk about Luca Blight. So I've already talked about how it does such a good job of making him feel intimidating and making you like really hate him and really want to take him down. In one of the best pieces of gameplay story integration that I've ever seen in a video game, the Luca Blight boss fight works entirely differently to how it works in the rest of the game and in like any of like any boss fight in Suikoden 1 for that matter as well. Narratively, what's going on is you're launching a surprise attack. You've been given intel from someone on the inside who is telling you that Luca Blight's going to launch a surprise night attack, and this is your chance to get the jump on him and turn the tables. You're like, okay, so you do that, and the Luca Blight fight is split into you need to make 3 parties of characters to fight Luca Blight. You have one led by Ryu, you have one led by Flick, and you have one led by Victor. And you need all 3 of those parties like gang up on him and do like a 3-stage boss fight with one of the best boss themes in any video game, in my opinion. It's called Chase. You should definitely look it up, or I think maybe it's The Chase. Just Google Luca Blight boss theme and you'll see it. It's man, and it culminates in a one-on-one like duel, which is another element of the gameplay that I haven't really talked about. I can't remember how they were handled in Eiyuden, but in the Suikoden games there are duels, which are like one-on-one fights between certain characters. Those, especially in Suikoden 2, work a lot like rock paper scissors, where you need to pick you need to guess what your opponent's going to go for based on. Oh yeah, I remember in Eiyuden they were like so cinematic and awesome, and the final boss had a bunch of them too, which is great. But yeah, so that's how the Luca Blight fight culminates, where like he's low on health. And you're standing there at full health. You've been completely healed at this point, and like it can still be difficult. He's making his last stand. He has a great line. I'm gonna try to find it. Yeah. So he says, "It took hundreds to kill me, but I killed humans by the thousands. Look at me. I am sublime. I am the face of evil." And then he collapses over. Man, what a fucking... Oh, man, I love him so much. And I know, like, he's not... Like, he is a force of nature villain through and through, where, like, he doesn't have, like... I mean, yeah, they try to, like, explain some motivation for him, where there's some shit going on with his mom and dad. He might have, like, some mommy issues or whatever. It's not given a whole lot of attention, and honestly, I'm fine with that, because, for me at least, right, like, interesting motivations and like, just like justifying his evil through like past trauma or whatever. That is only one way that a villain can be good and interesting, and Luca Blight checks all of my other boxes in spades. He is so fucking good. It's such a great fight. I highly recommend, if you're not gonna play the game yourself, like, look up this boss fight. It's so cool. But yeah, and then the game's not done delivering on surprises, because that's about the 2/3 mark, and I do think the story goes a little bit downhill from here. It's a little bit less interesting. There's a Necklord wrap up, but then you get into like the last segment of the game, and there's a few different endings that you can achieve here. So one of them is just kind of the normal ending, where you don't get the full 108 characters, or even if you do, there's an option to do this where you just kind of take over as leader of the city-state. There's like there's an explanation for why you're the right man for the job. You have you have half of the true rune called the rune of beginning, and Jowie has the other half. And there's like a history. There's like a really important battle that took place, where between like the people who had the 2 halves of the same rune. So like you're like a symbol basically. In fact, they're pretty transparent about the fact that you're mostly a figurehead for a lot of the game. But by the end of the game, like, you've made a real name for yourself. People are following you in droves. So you decide to take over as leader of the city-state. What you can also do is, if you have managed to get all 108 characters, actually, no. You can do this even if you don't get 108 characters. You just don't get like the better version of this event. So if you say no, I don't want to lead the city-state, they're like, okay, well, give you some time to think about it. You're supposed to say yes to like end the game. Essentially, you get the end credits. But if you say no, they're like, okay, you can just come back and tell us when you're ready. And you can explore the world, and there's a lot that's different now that the war is over. Everybody's chilling. If you go back to the spot where you started the game, at the very beginning of the game, when you jumped off of that cliff with Jowie, you made a promise. You said, if we get separated, we're going to meet back at this spot. And obviously, they meant like literally in the moment we might get separated by this river. But over the course of the game, they became very separated as well. And so if you make it back to that spot, you will confront Jowie in one final battle. And if you meet certain conditions, if you do not attack him at all during the fight, you have to just keep defending over and over and over again. And he keeps saying, like, I'm like, please fight back. I'm begging you, finish me off, let me die. But if you just keep defending, and if you manage to get all 108 characters, it turns out that Nanami survived, and decided to stay hidden so that you could focus on what you needed to do, as leader of the army. And she shows up and she meets up with you and Jowie, and the three of you go on to live your lives in happiness together, basically. And that's the good ending of the game. And I mean, that's just so sweet. I love that a lot. That's obviously my preferred ending. Well, I mean, I do think there's a lot to be said about like Jowie not surviving, right? Like, I think it's interesting. Like, I think maybe it's more interesting for his arc if that ends badly for him, right? Like he made his choice and he lost, so maybe it is more respectful to finish him off. Not everything needs to have a happy ending, but I do like that this has a happy ending because I like the characters and I want them to be happy. But there is another ending that you can get, and it's very interesting. It's a very interesting one. During the Necklord wrap up, after you beat Luca Blight, you have to fight Necklord again. During that whole segment of the story, Nanami has kind of been pushing this idea of like, hey, like, I understand that like it's your responsibility or whatever to lead the army. Why does it have to be you? Like, isn't there somebody else who can do this? Does it really need to be you? Why can't we just run away and like live in peace and let them just figure it out? Why does it have to be you? Because she's so worried about you. She's your sister, she's your older sister, and she wants what's best for you. And most of the time, you're not really given any kind of say in the matter. You're just like, yeah, whatever, I got to do it. Or if there is a choice, it's like very generic, like, oh, maybe you're right, but like, oh, it's fine, and we still got to do it. I don't, maybe someday we'll figure it out. This is the point in the game where if you play along with her, if you say, you know what, fuck yeah, maybe it doesn't have to be me. We beat Luca Blight. Jowie's the leader of Highland now at this point. I don't want to fight Jowie. That's the other reason that she's pushing it again, especially in this segment, is that she doesn't want to fight Jowie. And so she's like, yeah, let's just get out of here. And you can join her and run away. And that's an ending. There is a, like, if you do it for initially, then it just kind of creates an alternate branch where like someone dies because you weren't there, and they have a replacement character that comes in. I've never met them. I've never done this ending. But even after that happens, if you continue to push the issue, you can go out and live your life peacefully with Nanami. And I definitely think that's definitely not like my preferred ending, but the fact that it's there at all is like super cool and interesting. Okay, I've been going on for quite a while now, and in case you couldn't tell, with my positive ramblings, as well as the fact that I've said it multiple times now, I really, 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 really like this game. It's still my favorite game of all time. The replay did not do anything to change that. And I was so excited to share this with my friend as well. She was super invested in what was that? Maybe I shouldn't say super invested. Maybe that's giving the game a little bit too much credit. But she was interested. She was happy to see like how things resolved. She was happy when Nanami survived, etc., etc. So I'm happy that she came along with this journey for me. I believe she's gonna watch me play the other games as well. Which does bring me to the next part of what I want to talk about, which is where do we go from here? So you might think that that's a pretty straightforward question to answer, right? Suikoden 3 would come next, obviously. But that's actually not true, because there are spin-off games. I knew for a while, like vaguely, that there were some spin-off games involving Suikoden 2. But I never really looked into them that thoroughly. There's also like some other spin-off games that like are outside the main number ones. I might want to play them as well, although I don't know if I'm going to talk about them yet. What I am going to do though is I'm actually going to play the 2 Genso Suikoden games, which are visual novels starring as like sort of co-protagonists. There's a new character named Nash, but then also Sierra, the vampire from the events of Suikoden 2, is in these as well. And I don't know anything about them. I don't know if they're good. I don't know if they're like, how fun they are. They're visual novels, so there's not really like a gameplay element. But I like Sierra. Nash seems like a fun character so far too. I played like literally 10 or 15 minutes just to kind of like see what the deal was. There are translation patches available for both games. And I'm going to play them both, and I'm going to talk about them. So that's actually what you're going to see from this series next instead of Suikoden 3 is I'm going to be talking about Genso Suikoden 1 and 2. So join me for that. I'm very excited. And then I don't know where I'm going to go from there in terms of like spin-offs. I probably will just end up doing 3, 4, and 5, but that's what I thought too before finding out about Genso Suikoden. So I might end up changing my mind again. I don't know, but keep an eye out for that because I'm very excited to see what those are all about. I mean, maybe I won't talk about them if they're just dog shit, but I don't think that they're going to be. I think they're gonna end up being kind of fun. So yeah, looking forward to that. Thank you for listening to my insane ramblings about a series that nobody has any interest in or will ever play. But I'm very excited. Please, it's occurring to me now that I probably should have said something about this earlier. I'm definitely going to go back and add something at the beginning of this episode. So that people can hear this. Please, if you somehow made it through all of this, ignoring my warning, but you are now interested in playing these games, the dual remake, remaster of the first two games is coming out in March of 2025. I believe March 6th of 2025. It is a full remaster of Suikoden 1 and Suikoden 2. So I don't know how they're going to handle Suikoden 1. I know they have like new portraits, which is interesting. I do kind of like the watercolor. I think it has a lot of soul. I don't think it looks very good though, if I'm being honest. So like I'm not too upset that they're changing that. And yeah, and then I mean, I'm curious to see what they do with Suikoden 2 as well. One of the biggest issues of both of these games, I completely neglected to mention up to this point, is that the translations are really bad. So, I'm hoping that gets resolved. I think they're doing updated translations for all these. Newer, slicker looking UI. I'm hoping that they go as far as to add some quality of life features, but I'm not sure if that's going to happen. I don't know if I'm going to replace Suikoden 1 when this comes out. I might. I'm almost certainly going to replace Suikoden 2 though. I'm very excited about to play the shiny new Suikoden 2. I'm just so happy that these games are coming. When I last talked about this, during the Eiyuden episode, I had mentioned that like it was radio silence on this game for a really long time after it got announced in like I think 2022 is when it got announced, or maybe it was like early 2023. But I was like, there's no way that like we're gonna get these games anytime soon. I wasn't even confident that we were gonna get them at all. I thought they might have been canceled, but no, we got the final release date of March 6, 2025. I'm hoping they're good. It's I don't want to doom too hard. It's possible that they're not. It's possible that they end up sucking. But we shall see. So anyway, that's where I'll leave it. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Next up is going to be a main FE7 episode followed by an SSS. We'll get back on track with that. And then hopefully, I'll have more to report on Genso Suikoden soon. Okay, yeah, have a great rest of your day, everybody, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.